In the dusty frontier towns of New Terra, where humanity's descendants mix with alien refugees from 100 dying worlds, legends are born from the most unlikely encounters. This is the story of Jack Cordell, a weathered cowboy with a conscience as vast as the crimson desert he calls home, and Lyra, a young blind girl from the Zentari species, whose luminescent skin marks her as something extraordinary in this harsh new world. When Jack finds her collapsed on the roadside, desperate to reach a legendary healer in the mountains, he sees only someone in need. He doesn't know that her blindness wasn't an accident, that powerful enemies hunt her every move, or that her father commands the most feared criminal syndicate across 3 star systems. What begins as a simple act of mercy becomes a journey that will test every skill Jack possesses, challenge everything he believes about right and wrong, and ultimately force both of them to confront the shadows of their pasts. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is help a stranger. Sometimes it's the most necessary. The twin suns of New Terra hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the rust-colored sand as Jack Cordell urged his mechanized horse forward along the trade route. The cyborg stallion, part flesh and part machinery, moved with practiced ease through the rocky terrain that connected the settlement of Redemption Falls to the mining colonies beyond. Jack had made this journey 100 times before, carrying messages, escorting travelers, doing whatever honest work presented itself to a man with his particular set of skills and his particular past. He was 3 hours from town when he saw her, a crumpled figure beside an overturned cargo speeder that still smoked from whatever had forced it off the road. Jack's hand instinctively moved to the plasma revolver at his hip as he approached, scanning the surrounding rocks for signs of raiders or worse. But the area was clear, and as he drew closer, he realized the figure was a young woman, maybe 19 or 20 in human years, though with the Zentari, it was always hard to tell. She was sitting with her back against the wreckage, her face tilted toward the sound of his approach, despite eyes that seemed to stare through him rather than at him. Her skin had the characteristic shimmer of the Zentari people, shifting between shades of pearl and soft blue in the fading light. Blood, darker than human blood and tinged with an iridescent quality, stained a makeshift bandage wrapped around her left arm. Her clothes, though dusty and torn, had once been expensive, the kind of synthetic silk that cost more credits than most frontier folk saw in a year. Jack dismounted and approached slowly, his boots crunching on the scattered debris. "Miss, can you hear me?" The girl's head turned slightly toward his voice, and he noticed the scarring around her eyes, old wounds that had healed poorly. Whatever had taken her sight had happened months, maybe years ago. "I can hear you perfectly well, human," she said, her voice carrying the melodic accent of the Zentari homeworld, though there was an edge of pain beneath the words. "I suppose you read deciding whether I am worth robbing or if you should just leave me here to die." Jack crouched down beside her, noting the way she tensed at his proximity. "Neither, actually. I am trying to figure out how badly you re-hurt and where you were heading before your ride gave out." He examined the speeder's scorched engine core. "Looks like someone shot out your power cells, raiders?" The girl shook her head. "Not raiders. Please, I need to get to the mountains, to the settlement they call Sanctuary Peak. There's a healer there, a woman named Mother Kess. She's the only one who can help me." Jack knew of Sanctuary Peak, a remote monastery built into the highest mountains of the northern range, a week's hard travel from where they now sat. Mother Kess was legendary in these parts, a human woman who had learned the healing arts of a dozen alien species and who welcomed all who sought her help. She was also notoriously difficult to reach, the path to her monastery guarded by treacherous terrain and, some said, by choice. "That's a long way to go, miss, especially for someone in your condition. Maybe I should take you back to Redemption Falls, get you patched up proper." The girl's hand shot out with surprising speed, gripping his wrist with desperate strength. "No towns, no settlements where people might recognize me. Please, I can pay you. I have credits, enough to make it worth your while." There was fear in her voice now, raw and genuine, and Jack found himself wondering what could put that kind of terror in someone's heart. "I don't need your money," he said quietly, "but I do need to know what I'm getting into. Who's after you?" The girl's grip loosened, and she seemed to deflate against the wreckage. "If I tell you, you'll leave me here. Everyone does once they know." Jack studied her for a long moment, taking in the expensive clothes, the fear, the desperation to reach a healer far from civilization. He thought about the decent thing to do, about the man he'd been trying to become since he'd left his own dark past behind in the outer settlements. "Try me," he said finally. The girl was silent for so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My name is Lyra Vex. My father is Constantine Vex." Jack felt his blood run cold. Everyone in the frontier territories knew that name. Constantine Vex controlled the largest criminal empire in 3-star systems, dealing in everything from illegal weapons to flesh trade to the smuggling of banned technology. He was responsible for more deaths than could be counted, and his reputation for brutality toward those who crossed him was legendary. And Jack had just promised to help his daughter. The night desert of New Terra was cold enough to frost the breath, and Jack built a small fire using dried scrubrush and chemical ignition tabs while Lyra sat wrapped in his spare thermal blanket. She had refused to speak further about her identity after her revelation, seeming to expect him to mount his mechanical horse and ride away without looking back. Instead, he had made camp, tended to her wounded arm with supplies from his saddlebag, and prepared a meal of protein rations and reconstituted vegetables. "You're still here," Lyra said finally, her unseeing eyes directed toward the sound of water boiling over the fire. Most people would have run by now. Jack poured the hot water into 2 metal cups, adding the powdered nutrients that passed for coffee in the outer territories. "I'm not most people. And you're not your father." He pressed one of the cups into her hands, knowing how carefully she felt its heat before taking a sip. "Aren't I?" she asked bitterly. "I lived in his compound, enjoyed the luxuries his crimes provided, never questioned where the money came from. I'm complicit in everything he's done." Jack settled back against his saddle, studying her in the firelight. "So why are you running? Why risk everything to reach Mother Kess?" Lyra was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. 2 years ago, I witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see. My father was concluding a deal with off-road traders, selling Zentari children into slavery. Our people, my people, being treated as merchandise. Her voice cracked slightly. I tried to stop it. I was so naive, so stupid. I thought if I just talked to him, made him understand that these were lives, not commodities, he would listen. She laughed, a hollow sound without humor. Instead, he decided to teach me a lesson about loyalty and the cost of betrayal. He had his doctors take my site, carefully and methodically, making sure I survived the process so I could live with the consequences of my compassion. Jack felt a cold anger building in his chest, the kind he hadn't felt in years. "That's how you went blind? Your own father did that to you?" Lyra nodded. "He kept me locked away after that, a prisoner in my own home. He told everyone I had been in an accident, that he was protecting me while I recovered. In truth, he was making sure I could never expose his operations, never leave to tell the authorities what I knew." She took another sip of the ersatz coffee, and Jack noticed her hands were shaking. 3 months ago, I learned that Mother Kess had successfully restored sight to a Zentari merchant who had been blinded in an accident. The technique was experimental, dangerous, and required rare materials that my father's enemies had in their possession. But it was a chance, maybe my only chance to see again, to be able to escape and start over somewhere he couldn't find me. Jack began to understand the stakes. "So you stole from your father to get what you needed." "I stole a fortune in crystallized quantum cores from his vault," Lyra confirmed. Enough to buy the materials Mother Cass needs and to start a new life. I bribed guards, arranged for false transport documents, and made it 3 days before his people found me. She gestured toward the destroyed speeder. They shot out my engine, planning to take me back alive. But the crash killed the driver and knocked me clear. They must have thought I died in the explosion because they didn't search for my body. Jack processed this information, weighing it against what he knew of Constant Vex. They know you survived by now. They'll have trackers, scanners, every resource your father can bring to bear. The entire frontier will be hunting for you. I know, Lyra said softly. That's why I understand if you want to leave. This isn't your fight, and helping me will make you an enemy of the most powerful criminal in 3 systems. Jack walked to where his mechanical horse stood in patient hibernation mode. From the saddlebag, he pulled out his old range map, a battered datapad that showed the terrain between their current position and Sanctuary Peak. The direct route would take them through several settlements and along well-traveled trade routes, places where Vex's people would certainly be watching. But there were other paths, harder paths through the deep desert and the mountain passes that few travelers used anymore. We'll need supplies, he said, studying the map. Water, especially. The route I'm thinking of goes through dry country, and we can't risk stopping at the usual way stations. Lyra stood slowly, the blanket falling from her shoulders. You're going to help me? Even knowing who my father is? Jack looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the daughter of a crime lord, but a young woman who had risked everything to save children from slavery, who had paid for her compassion with her sight, and who was fighting for a chance at freedom. Especially knowing who your father is, he said. Someone needs to stand up to men like him, even if it's just one cowboy and one blind girl crossing a desert. For the first time since he had found her, Lyra smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. Thank you, Jack Cordell. I won't forget this. He nodded and returned to studying the map. Don't thank me yet. We've got a week of hard travel ahead of us, and every bounty hunter and criminal enforcer in the territory will be looking for you. This is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. 3 days into their journey, Jack's worst fears began to materialize. They had been traveling through the deep desert, following ancient riverbeds that had been dry for centuries, staying away from settlements and trade routes. Lyra had proven to be more resilient than he had expected, adapting to the rhythm of travel on his mechanical horse with remarkable speed. She sat in front of him in the saddle, her hands gripping the pommel while Jack guided them through the treacherous terrain. They were crossing a valley of red stone formations, towers of sandstone that rose like ancient sentinels against the blue-green sky, when Jack noticed the dust trail on the horizon behind them. His hand immediately went to the optical enhancer on his belt, a battered piece of military surplus that still functioned well enough for scouting. Through the magnified view, he could make out 3 hover bikes, modified for speed and equipped with weapon mounts. Bounty hunters, almost certainly, tracking them across the wasteland. We've got company, he said quietly, and felt Lyra tense in front of him. How many? 3 that I can see. Could be more. He urged the mechanical horse forward, increasing their speed as much as he dared across the rocky ground. We need to find cover, somewhere defensible. Lyra turned her head slightly, her expression thoughtful despite her blindness. There's a cave network about 2 kilometers northeast of here. I heard my father's pilots mention it once when planning smuggling routes. It's supposed to be extensive, with multiple exits. Jack adjusted their course, impressed despite himself. Good memory. When you can't see, you learn to hold on to information differently, Lyra replied. Every conversation, every ambient sound, every detail matters because you never know what might save your life. They reached the cave entrance just as the hoverbikes came into visual range. The opening was narrow but tall, barely wide enough for the mechanical horse to squeeze through. The cave opened into a larger chamber, and Jack's flashlight revealed multiple passages leading deeper into the mountain. "Can your horse go farther in?" Lyra asked. Jack shook his head before realizing she couldn't see the gesture. "No, the passages get too narrow. We'll have to go on foot if we want to use the other exits." He heard the whine of hover bikes approaching the cave entrance. "Stay here with the horse. I'll try to lead them away." "No," Lyra said firmly. "We stay together. I might not be able to see, but I can still be useful." She reached into her pack and pulled out a small device that Jack recognized as a Zentari sonic disruptor, a weapon that emitted targeted sound waves capable of disorienting or incapacitating most species. "I can't aim it precisely, but in a cave system I don't need to. The acoustics will do the work for me." Jack started to argue, but the sound of boots on stone cut him short. The bounty hunters had dismounted and were entering the cave. "Lyra Vex," a harsh voice called out, echoing through the chamber. "Your father wants you back home. Come quietly, and we don't have to make this painful." He could see 3 figures now, all human, all heavily armed with the kind of military-grade weapons that weren't supposed to be in civilian hands. The leader was a tall woman with cybernetic implants covering half her face, scanners and targeting systems that glowed with a cold blue light. "Your father is offering a substantial reward for your safe return," the woman continued. "But he didn't say you had to be comfortable." "That cowboy helping you?" "He's already dead. He just doesn't know it yet." Jack felt Lyra's hand on his arm, and she leaned close to whisper. "When I activate the disruptor, it's going to be loud and disorienting. Cover your ears and trust me." Before he could respond, she raised the sonic device and activated it. The sound was unlike anything Jack had experienced, a bone-deep vibration that seemed to resonate through every surface of the cave. The bounty hunters screamed, dropping their weapons to clutch at their heads as the sonic waves amplified and reflected through the chamber. Jack, his ears protected by his hands and partially shielded by Lyra's deliberate positioning, moved quickly. He fired 3 precise shots, aiming for the weapons on the ground rather than the incapacitated hunters. The plasma bolts melted the guns into useless slag, eliminating the immediate threat without taking lives. Lyra deactivated the disruptor, and the sudden silence was almost as shocking as the sound had been. "The far passage," she said, her voice strained. "It leads northeast toward the mountains. We need to move now, before they recover." Jack grabbed the mechanical horse's reins and led it toward the passage Lyra had indicated, marveling at how she seemed to navigate the cave system with confidence despite her blindness. As they moved deeper into the mountain, he realized that she was using the same echolocation techniques that allowed her to use the sonic disruptor so effectively, interpreting the return of sounds to build a mental map of their surroundings. Behind them, the bounty hunters were beginning to recover, their angry shouts echoing through the caves. But Lyra led them through a maze of passages with surprising speed, taking turns that seemed random, but always led them forward, always kept them ahead of their pursuers. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, they emerged from a different cave entrance, this one high on a mountainside with a view of the valley below. Jack could see the bounty hunters' hover bikes parked near the original entrance, small from this distance. "We bought ourselves some time," he said, helping Lyra mount the mechanical horse. "But they'll find our trail eventually." Lyra nodded, her face pale from exertion. "Then we keep moving. We're 3 days from Sanctuary Peak now. We just have to stay ahead of them that long." As they rode away from the cave system, Jack couldn't help but notice the way Lyra's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the saddle. The encounter had cost her more than she was admitting, the stress and fear taking their toll. But she hadn't complained, hadn't asked to stop or turn back. She had fought alongside him, using her disability as a weapon rather than treating it as a weakness. Whatever else Lyra Vex was, she was a survivor. And Jack was beginning to understand that getting her to Mother Kess wasn't just about restoring her sight. It was about giving her the chance to become something more than her father's victim. The mountains of New Terra's northern range were beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Peaks that scraped the sky where the air grew thin and the temperature dropped below freezing, even during the day. Jack and Lyra had been climbing for 2 days since their escape from the cave system, following a narrow trail that wound between sheer cliffs and dizzying drops. The mechanical horse managed the terrain with its usual reliable efficiency, but Jack could feel the strain in its servos as it navigated the increasingly difficult path. They had stopped to rest in a small hollow protected from the wind when Lyra finally asked the question Jack had been expecting. "Why are you doing this? You've risked your life for me, made yourself an enemy of my father, and I still don't know why. What's in this for you?" Jack was quiet for a moment, staring out at the valley far below. "About 5 years ago, I was working security for a mining operation in the Outer Territories. It was supposed to be legitimate work, protecting shipments and facilities. Turns out the company was a front for some nasty business, human trafficking disguised as labor contracts." He felt Lyra's attention sharpen, though her expression remained neutral. "By the time I figured out what was really happening, I was in deep. I had helped transport 3 shipments of workers who were actually slaves, people who would never see their homes again. When I found out, I had a choice: walk away and pretend I didn't know, or do something about it." "What did you do?" Lyra asked softly. "I freed them," Jack said. "All of them. Broke the chains, destroyed the transport records, and made sure they got passage back to their home worlds. But I couldn't undo what I'd already done. I couldn't give back the weeks or months they'd lost. Couldn't erase the trauma. I was complicit, even if I didn't know, even if I tried to make it right." He turned to look at Lyra, seeing his own guilt reflected in her story. "So, when I found you on that road, when you told me about the children you tried to save, I saw someone who had made the choice I should have made sooner. You stood up to your father even knowing what it would cost you. That takes courage I'm not sure I had at your age." Lyra was quiet for a long time, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I'd been so angry at him, at what he took from me. But I never thought about what I took from him. His daughter, his heir, the one person he thought he could trust. When I betrayed him, it wasn't just about the business. It was personal." Jack was about to respond when he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. The high-pitched whine of military-grade aircraft engines. He grabbed his optical enhancer and scanned the sky, his stomach dropping as he spotted not bounty hunters, but a full enforcement squad. 6 heavily armed flyers in formation, heading directly toward their position. "We need to move now," he said, already pulling Lyra toward the mechanical horse. "Your father didn't just send bounty hunters. He sent a kill squad." The aircraft were closing fast, and Jack knew they couldn't outrun them on the mountain trail. He urged the mechanical horse forward, pushing it to dangerous speeds along the narrow path. But plasma bolts began impacting the rocks around them, superheated stone exploding into deadly shrapnel. Then Lyra did something unexpected. She reached into her pack and pulled out a small crystalline device that glowed with an inner light. "The quantum core," she said. "I kept one back from the materials for Mother Kess. I thought I might need it for emergencies. What does it do?" Jack asked, even as he guided the horse around a sharp bend, feeling one of its hooves slip on the icy stone. "It's a shield generator, military grade. It'll protect us from the weapons fire, but only for about 5 minutes before it burns out." 5 minutes, Jack. That's all we have." She activated the device, and a shimmering dome of energy enveloped them, the plasma bolts from the aircraft splashing harmlessly against its surface. But the shield also made them a more obvious target, and the attack intensified. More aircraft appeared, converging from different directions, and Jack realized with growing horror that this wasn't just about bringing Lyra back. Constantin Vex had decided that if he couldn't have his daughter, no one would. The trail ahead forked, one path continuing along the mountainside, the other diving into a narrow canyon. Jack made a split-second decision and urged the mechanical horse into the canyon, the walls rising steeply on either side. The aircraft had to break formation to follow, unable to fire effectively in the confined space. 3 minutes left on the shield. The canyon twisted and turned, and Jack pushed the mechanical horse to its limits. The cyborg animal's breathing labored, but its pace never faltering. Then he saw it ahead. The canyon ended in a waterfall, a sheer drop of at least 200 meters into a churning pool of snowmelt far below. Behind them, the aircraft were catching up, their weapons charging for a final devastating barrage. 2 minutes. Jack, Lyra said, her voice surprisingly calm. I can hear the water ahead. It's a waterfall, isn't it? Yes, he admitted. And we're trapped. 1 minute. Lyra turned her head toward him, and despite her blindness, her unseeing eyes seemed to look directly into his soul. Do you trust me? Jack thought about the past days, about how she had guided them through the caves, about her courage and determination, about the way she had never given up even when she had every reason to. Yes, he said. I trust you. Then we jump, she said. The pool is deep enough, and the shield will protect us from the impact. But we have to go now, before it fails. Jack looked at the drop, at the certain death that awaited if her calculations were wrong, if the shield failed a second too soon, if the water wasn't deep enough. Behind them, the aircraft were emerging from the canyon, weapons hot and ready. He made his choice. Jack turned the mechanical horse toward the waterfall and spurred it forward. For a moment, they were airborne, suspended between the mountain and the valley far below. The shield glowed brilliant white as plasma bolts converged on their position. And then they were falling into the roaring water and the darkness beyond. Jack regained consciousness slowly, his body aching and his lungs burning. He was on a rocky shore, water lapping at his boots, and the first thing he saw was Lyra kneeling beside him, her hands on his chest, checking for injuries with practiced efficiency despite her blindness. You're alive, she said, relief evident in her voice. I was beginning to worry. You weren't breathing when we surfaced, and I had to perform resuscitation techniques my medical tutors taught me years ago. He sat up carefully, taking stock of his condition. Bruised, battered, but miraculously intact, thanks to the quantum shield that had held just long enough. The mechanical horse stood nearby, its organic components looking exhausted, but its mechanical systems still functional. The aircraft were gone, either unable to locate them after the fall or convinced that no one could survive such a plunge. Where are we? Jack asked, his voice rough. Lyra helped him to his feet, supporting his weight with surprising strength. Based on the water temperature and flow rate, I'd estimate we're about 3 kilometers downstream from where we jumped. The good news is that we're much closer to Sanctuary Peak now. The bad news is that we're on the wrong side of the river, and the only bridge for 50 kilometers is controlled by the Red Scar gang. Jack knew of the Red Scar, a loose confederation of bandits and smugglers who controlled several key mountain passes. They weren't aligned with Constantine Vex, but they weren't friendly to strangers either, especially strangers who couldn't pay their tolls. How much currency do we have left? Enough for basic supplies, but not enough for the bribes the Red Scar demands, Lyra admitted. We'll have to negotiate or find another way across. They spent the next several hours tending to their wounds and salvaging what they could from their supplies. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of orange and purple, they set out toward the bridge, knowing that time was running out. If Constantine Vex's forces found them before they reached Mother Kess, all their struggles would have been for nothing. The bridge came into view as the last light faded from the sky, a massive structure of metal and stone that spanned a gorge nearly 100 meters across. At its base sat a fortified checkpoint, complete with armed guards and scanning equipment. Jack and Lyra approached slowly, hands visible and weapons holstered, making it clear they weren't looking for a fight. The guard who met them was a grizzled veteran with scars that suggested a violent past, but his eyes were sharp and calculating. "Toll is 500 credits per person, 1,000 for the animal," he said without preamble. "Pay or turn around." Jack did the math in his head. They had maybe 300 credits between them, nowhere near enough. "We don't have that kind of money," he admitted. "But we might have something else you'd be interested in." He pulled out his plasma revolver, a custom piece worth far more than the toll, and offered it to the guard. "This weapon for passage. It's military grade, practically new, worth at least 3 times what you're asking." The guard examined the weapon with professional interest, but then shook his head. "Nice piece, but I can't take it. Word came down today from the boss. We're looking for a blind Zentari girl traveling with a human male. There's a substantial reward for information leading to their capture." He looked directly at Lyra, and Jack's hand moved toward his backup weapon. "You're her, aren't you?" "Constantine Vex's daughter." Lyra stepped forward before Jack could stop her, her chin raised defiantly. "Yes, I'm Lyra Vex. And yes, my father is offering a reward for my return. But before you claim it, you should know that he'll kill me the moment he has me back. Not quickly, not mercifully, but as an example to anyone who might think about betraying him. Is that reward worth having my blood on your hands?" The guard was silent for a long moment, studying Lyra's face, the scars around her eyes, the quiet dignity with which she carried herself despite everything. "Your father did that to you, didn't he? Took your sight as punishment?" "Yes," Lyra said simply. "For trying to stop him from selling Zentari children into slavery." The guard's expression hardened, and for a moment Jack thought they were about to die. Then the guard stepped aside and gestured toward the bridge. "Go, quickly, before my relief arrives. And when you get to wherever you're going, you tell people what kind of monster Constantine Vex really is." Jack started to thank him, but the guard cut him off. "No, I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because 15 years ago, I was one of those children your father sold, Lyra Vex. I survived, escaped, made a new life. But a lot of others didn't. If helping you hurts him in any way, that's payment enough." They crossed the bridge in silence, the weight of the guard's story heavy on both of them. On the far side, the trail to Sanctuary Peak stretched upward into the mountains, and Jack could see the glow of lights far above, the monastery that was their destination. They were less than a day's travel away now, but as they began the final ascent, Lyra suddenly stopped. "Jack, there's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice shaking. "Something I should have mentioned days ago but was too afraid to say." Jack felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. "What is it?" "When I stole the quantum cores from my father, I also copied his entire operation database. Every transaction, every contact, every crime committed over the past 10 years. I have evidence that could bring down his entire empire, implicate dozens of corrupt officials, free hundreds of slaves. That's the real reason he wants me back. Not because I'm his daughter, but because I could destroy everything he's built." She pulled a data chip from a hidden pocket in her jacket, a tiny piece of technology worth more than plants. "This is what we've really been protecting, Jack. This is why people have died. And once we reach Mother Cass, once I can see again, I'm going to use it. I'm going to burn my father's empire to the ground." Jack looked at the data chip, at Lyra's determined face, and understood that this journey had never been just about restoring her sight. It had been about giving her the tools to fight back, to become more than a victim. "Then we better get moving," he said quietly. "Because when your father figures out what you're planning, he'll send everything he has to stop us." Sanctuary Peak Monastery emerged from the mountain mist like something from a dream. Ancient stone structures built into the very rock of the mountain, prayer flags fluttering in the thin air. Mother Cass met them at the gate personally, a woman who appeared to be in her 60s, but whose eyes held the wisdom of someone far older. She took one look at Lyra and knew immediately why they had come. "The Zentari girl who holds the fate of empires in her hand," Mother Kess said, her voice gentle but knowing. "I'd been expecting you, though perhaps not in such dramatic fashion. Your father's forces are amassing in the valley below. They'll attack within the hour." Jack felt his exhaustion threaten to overwhelm him. They had come so far, overcome so much, only to face a final battle they couldn't possibly win. "How many?" 200 soldiers, maybe more," Mother Kess replied. "Constantine Vex himself is with them. He's done hiding behind intermediaries." She turned to Lyra. "Come, child. We don't have much time if we're to restore your sight before the attack begins." The procedure was conducted in a chamber, deep within the monastery, surrounded by equipment that mixed ancient Zentari healing techniques with cutting-edge human medical technology. Jack stood guard at the door while Mother Kess worked, aware that every moment brought their enemies closer. 45 minutes later, Lyra emerged, bandages wrapped around her eyes but walking with new confidence. "It's done," Mother Kess said. "In 24 hours, when the bandages come off, she'd be able to see again. Whether she gets that chance depends on what happens next." They gathered in the monastery's main hall, where Mother Kess had assembled her community, a diverse group of humans and aliens who had all come seeking healing or sanctuary. "We don't have weapons," an elderly Zentari man said. "We're healers, not warriors. How can we possibly stand against Vex's army?" Jack was about to speak when Lyra stepped forward, removing the data chip from her pocket. "We don't fight them with weapons," she said. "We fight them with truth." She handed the chip to Mother Kess. "Everything my father has done, every crime he's committed, it's all on there. If we broadcast it across all frequencies, send it to every news organization, every law enforcement agency, every government in the frontier territories, his empire will collapse. He won't be a feared crime lord anymore. He'll be a wanted fugitive with nowhere to run." Mother Kess examined the chip with interest. "This will destroy him, yes, but it will also expose everyone he's worked with, corrupt officials who have the power to cause tremendous suffering in retaliation. Are you prepared for the consequences?" Lyra's voice was firm. "I've been prepared since the day he took my sight. I just needed the chance to see clearly again before I pulled down his world." Within minutes, Mother Kess had activated the monastery's communication array, a powerful system designed to maintain contact with remote outposts across the frontier. The data began broadcasting, spreading across networks faster than it could be contained. In the valley below, Jack could see confusion rippling through Vex's forces as the information reached them, as they learned the full extent of their employer's crimes. Then he saw Constantine Vex himself, a tall figure in expensive armor, climbing the trail toward the monastery with a small guard of his most loyal soldiers. This was to be the final confrontation then, father and daughter facing each other one last time. They met on the monastery steps, Vex's scarred face twisted with rage as he stared at Lyra. "You've destroyed everything," he said, his voice cold. "Do you understand what you've done? The empire I built, the power I wielded, all of it gone because of your self-righteous betrayal." Lyra stood straight, her bandaged eyes directed toward the sound of his voice. "I freed the people you enslaved. I've exposed the officials you corrupted. I've ended the suffering you caused. If that's betrayal, then I'm proud to be a traitor." Vex raised his weapon, a plasma rifle aimed directly at his daughter's heart. Jack moved to intercept, but Lyra held up her hand to stop him. "Go ahead, father," she said calmly. "Kill me. Make me a martyr. Give the frontier one more reason to hunt you down. Or you can walk away now, disappear into the outer territories while you still have the chance. The choice is yours." For a long moment, Constantine Vex stood frozen, his finger on the trigger, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Then, slowly, something seemed to break inside him. He lowered the weapon, his shoulders sagging as the weight of his crumbling empire settled upon him. You were always the best of me, he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the mountain wind. The only good thing I ever created, and I destroyed you for it. He turned away without another word, his remaining guards following as he descended the mountain trail. Jack watched them go, aware that authorities across 3 star systems would soon be hunting Vex, that his days of freedom were numbered. But for now, in this moment, the immediate danger had passed. 24 hours later, when the bandages finally came off, Lyra opened her eyes to see the world for the first time in 2 years. She stood on the monastery balcony, tears streaming down her face as she took in the sunrise over the mountains, the vast expanse of the frontier stretching to the horizon. Jack stood beside her, and when she finally turned to look at him, really look at him, she smiled. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for believing in me when I had every reason to give up." Jack nodded, feeling a sense of completion he hadn't experienced in years. "What will you do now?" Lyra looked out at the world she had helped change, at the frontier that would be forever different because of the courage she had shown. "I'll testify. Against my father, against everyone in that database. I'll help free the people he enslaved, dismantle what's left of his operations. And then, maybe, I'll come back here. Mother Cass has offered to teach me the healing arts. I think I'd like that, helping people instead of running from the past." She turned back to Jack. "What about you, Cowboy? What does a man do after he's helped topple an empire?" Jack smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in days. "I thought I might stick around for a while. Someone needs to make sure you don't get into any more trouble on your way to those testimonials. And after that, well, the frontier's a big place. I'm sure there are other people who need help, other wrongs that need righting." Below them, in the valley, they could see the authorities arriving, ships from a dozen different agencies coming to secure the evidence Lyra had provided, to begin the long process of bringing justice to those who had suffered under Constantine Vex's reign. The story would spread across the frontier, the tale of a blind girl who had stood against impossible odds, and the cowboy who had helped her find her way. In the settlements and space stations, in the mining colonies and agricultural worlds, people would speak of this day as the beginning of something new, a moment when courage triumphed over fear, when compassion proved stronger than cruelty. Lyra reached out and took Jack's hand, squeezing it gently. For the first time since he had found her collapsed beside that wrecked speeder, she looked peaceful, the weight of her past finally beginning to lift. They stood together watching the sunrise, 2 unlikely heroes who had found redemption in each other's company, who had learned that sometimes the most important journey isn't about reaching a destination, but about becoming the person you need to be along the way. The frontier stretched before them, vast and full of possibility, and whatever came next, they would face it with clear eyes and courageous hearts. In the end, Jack reflected, it had never really been about helping a stranger reach a healer. It had been about 2 wounded souls finding healing in each other, about discovering that even in the darkest moments, there is always a choice to do what's right. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that choice leads you exactly where you need to be. The twin suns climbed higher in the sky, casting their light across New Terra's mountains and valleys, illuminating a world forever changed by the actions of a cowboy and a blind girl who refused to accept that some battles couldn't be won, some wrongs couldn't be righted. Their story would become legend, but for now, in this perfect moment, they were simply 2 people who had survived, who had fought, and who had won, not just against their enemies, but against the darkness that had threatened to consume them both. Mother Cass joined them on the balcony, her wise eyes taking in the scene with satisfaction. "You know," she said softly, "I've been healing people for 40 years, and I've learned something important. The body's wounds are often the easiest to mend. It's the wounds of the heart and soul that require the greatest courage to heal. You both came here seeking different things, but you found what you really needed, the strength to forgive yourselves, and the courage to build something better from the ashes of your pasts. Lyra nodded, her newly restored eyes bright with unshed tears. What happens to people like my father? People who cause so much suffering? Mother Cass considered the question carefully. Some find redemption, though it's rare. Most simply face the consequences of their actions. Your father made his choices, just as you made yours. The difference is that you chose compassion over cruelty, justice over power. That's what separates the heroes from the villains in the end. Not their abilities or their resources, but the choices they make when faced with moral crossroads. As the day progressed and the authorities began their interviews and evidence collection, Jack and Lyra told their story dozens of times. Each retelling seemed to solidify it in reality, to make it real in a way it hadn't been during the desperate flight across the frontier. They spoke of the cave chase, the waterfall jump, the bridge crossing, and each time they finished, they saw the same expression on the listeners' faces: hope. Hope that one person could make a difference, that standing up to tyranny was possible, that the frontier could be more than just survival of the strongest. In the weeks that followed, the full extent of Constantine Vex's empire became clear. Hundreds of slaves were freed, dozens of corrupt officials arrested, and countless criminal operations shut down. Vex himself was captured 3 months later, trying to flee to the Outer Rim territories. He would spend the rest of his life in a maximum security facility, his power broken, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about the price of unchecked ambition and cruelty. Lyra remained at Sanctuary Peak, learning the healing arts from Mother Cass, and eventually becoming one of the most skilled healers in the frontier territories. She specialized in helping victims of trauma, using her own experiences to connect with those who had suffered at the hands of people like her father. Jack stayed for 6 months, helping rebuild and fortify the monastery, training the community in basic defense techniques in case they ever faced another threat. But eventually, the call of the open frontier became too strong to resist. He said his goodbyes to Lyra one morning as the twin suns rose over the mountains, both of them knowing it wasn't really goodbye, but rather a see you later. "You'll always have a place here," Lyra told him, embracing him warmly. "Whenever you need rest, whenever you need healing, Sanctuary Peak will welcome you." Jack smiled and mounted his mechanical horse, the faithful cyborg animal that had carried them through so much. "And you'll always have someone watching your back, even from a distance. I'll be out there, helping where I can, fighting the good fight. Maybe our paths will cross again." "They will," Lyra said with certainty, her healed eyes seeing not just the present, but somehow glimpsing the future. "I can feel it." As Jack rode down the mountain trail, he looked back once to see Lyra standing at the monastery gate, Mother Cass beside her, both of them waving. He raised his hand in farewell and then turned his eyes forward, toward the horizon and whatever adventures awaited. The frontier was vast, full of injustice and suffering, but also full of people like Lyra who needed someone to believe in them, to help them find their own courage. He had started this journey as a man seeking redemption for past failures, and he had found it in the most unexpected way, not through grand gestures or heroic sacrifice, but through simple human kindness, through choosing to help someone in need, even when it was dangerous, even when it cost him everything. That choice had changed 2 lives forever and set in motion events that had changed an entire region of space. It was a reminder that every choice matters, that every act of compassion ripples outward in ways we can never fully predict. The story of the cowboy and the blind alien girl spread throughout the frontier territories, inspiring others to stand against injustice, to help strangers in need, to believe that change was possible. Songs were written about them, stories told around campfires and in space station bars, each version slightly different, but all carrying the same message: courage, compassion, and determination can overcome even the darkest evil. And somewhere on a mountain monastery, a young Zentari woman with restored sight, looked out at the world she had helped save, and smiled, knowing that she had finally found not just her vision, but her purpose. She was no longer Constantine Vex's daughter, no longer defined by her father's crimes or her own victimhood. She was Lyra, healer and hero, a woman who had faced her fears and emerged stronger, a beacon of hope in a frontier that desperately needed it. The twin suns set over New Terra, casting long shadows across the desert and mountains, and in those shadows and light, two souls had found redemption, purpose, and the strength to face whatever tomorrow might bring.